Thanks a lot. And wow, hello everyone. What a crowd. So do I just press next? Yes, there you go. So great to be here. I hope you have enjoyed a little bit of Dubrovnik like I have in the last few days. It's a beautiful city, so great to be here. But what I've been asked to talk about today is the reform of research assessment. I'll do that, but to do that, I will need to explain to you who EUA is, and also more importantly, how we as EUA got to work on the reform of research assessment. The last thing also, I will go, by the way, in the details of the agreement on reforming research assessment and the coalition CoARA. And I'll try to finish by telling you about the implications in general for your institutions, but also for you specifically. I think we're talking to pure users here, we're talking about CRIS systems, and I think it does have implications. So let me start right away with the EUA. I only have one slide. What you can see there is that we are actually the largest university association in Europe. We represent almost 900 universities, and that's not just within the European Union. As you can see, we go well beyond. We're in more than 50 countries. And among our membership, we also have 35 national rectors conferences. And that includes the latest one, the 35th, that arrived with us in April, the Ukrainian National Rectors Conference. So what we do, as was just explained actually, is we do advocacy towards the European institutions, so the Commission, the Parliament, for example, and we try to, advocate for good regulatory, but also in general, good framework condition, including, trust me, I'm working already quite a lot on the next framework program, so that's what we do. And then we have a whole lot of other services towards our membership, for the members. And one of the ways we do that is actually we survey our members. So here what you can see is a series of 6 different surveys that we've conducted since 2014 on open science. The first ones obviously were around open access, then fair data came about. But you can see that the one before last focused on research assessment itself, okay? And then the more recent one, the one we published back in 2021 now, really looked more broadly at open science. So it was from principles to practices. I'm not going to go into details, but I want to use this as the evidence that we at EUA are using to explain why it is that we're involved in the reform of research assessment. What you see here is a result from the 2019 one on research assessment. And we were asking universities, basically, when you assess your researchers, which one of those listed here are the ones that you use, that you think are the most important. And obviously, I'm sure it won't come as a surprise to you, but overwhelmingly, 90% of the universities consider it to be very important or important research publication, followed by just above 80% attracting funding. Unfortunately, from there, it all goes down. And you can see that with just above 30%, we are actually with open science and open access. So it barely makes it as being very important for many universities. It's about only a third consider that. Worst, it's even the case for other research outputs, or for example, social outreach, mentoring. So you can see how other activities that researchers do, like teaching, for example, supervision, are not taken into account as much as how much you publish and how much money you get. So that's a reality. Worse than that, in the same survey, when we ask actually which of the following does your institution use to measure, and I'm talking measure the research output of your researchers, so we're talking about a researcher here. You can see the journal impact factor is still overwhelmingly used by 75% of universities. When we all know very well that when Garfield invented the GIF, it was to measure a journal, but certainly not a researcher, a research project, or a research institution. So that's what we see in our surveys. And that's what has led us to develop this vision for 2025, which is our agenda at EUA for open science, that envisions Europe's universities to be part of a scholarly ecosystem that will be characterized, and here I focus on priority number 3, which is institutional approaches to research assessment. And this means responsible, transparent, and sustainable research assessment systems that will include, yes, of course, open science, but not just. And, very importantly too, you need to have a very good balance between the qualitative approach to your assessment and the use of quantitative metrics. I can't help in this case also mention the two other priorities that we have, but I will not be talking about those. The first one is universal and perpetual open access to scholarly outputs, and the second one is about fair research data. But let's go back to priority number 3, and the institutional approaches to research assessment. It is one of our focus. In that line of thought, you won't be surprised that EUA in the last 10 years has worked a lot on international rankings. And we do see some of the negative effects among our membership and beyond, actually also globally. Therefore, we are very supportive of iNorms and of their More Than Our Rank initiative. Again, no time to speak in details about this. I would urge you to go and check it out because it does have also a consequence for the reform of research assessment, which I'll be talking right after. So I want to stress also that open science is not the only way at EUA that we get into the reform of research assessment. This is a survey, the first ever survey we conducted on innovation at universities. We had 166 of our members that actually answered. And what we see in this survey is that when we ask what sort of support does your university provide to your staff to enhance their institutional capacity on innovation? You can see that on top, you have commercial support for commercialization, great, ideas, research results. Then come dedicated support services, TTOs, and such services. But you have to go all the way down to only a third, with 33% of universities that do consider career assessment as one of the ways to incentivize innovation, entrepreneurial skills. Only 1/3. So there's a long way to go there too. And don't worry, I'm not going to go into details of this slide, but it's just that we also have 3 priorities when it comes to innovation in our agenda. And priority number 2 is university innovation capacity, competence, and culture. Because what we found with our survey is that while you do have a group, small group, of universities in Europe that are leading in terms of innovation, they have innovation as part of their strategy, but they also have the capacity to do it. Unfortunately, there's a large number of universities in Europe that would like to be there, but are not there yet. So they are what we call the emerging innovators. They have put it in there, and the vast majority of universities have innovation today in their strategy, but they're not yet at the point where they can do it best, because they don't have the capacity, they don't have the competence, and sometimes they don't have the culture. And some of the reason for that is that their staff is not always incentivized, actually, or have the experience, the entrepreneur skills to teach it or use it in their research or do actually innovation activities. And so that has led us to define as one of the key objectives for ourselves in the sector to really think about career development, and in this case I'm talking about staff, it's also the case of students, and again, to think seriously about reforming academic career assessment. I'm not talking anymore about research assessment, I'm talking about career assessment at universities. So just to let you know, this is not just coming from open science. It's overwhelmingly coming from many different fields, and it makes sense. Because of course, we're focusing so much on just what we publish. So, sorry, those images have changed in the transfer, but you won't be surprised that, of course, within the EUA strategic plan, but also within the vision for 2030, which is the Universities Without Walls, so this vision for 2030 for universities that EUA published recently, the reform of careers, academic careers, is a central part. It's a strategic priority. And the whole idea here is to be able to go back to what are our strong academic values, what is at the core of what we do. And then when you think carefully about that, think about research integrity, openness, knowledge sharing. When you think about that, how do you take that into account? How does this diversity actually become how you measure, if you need to measure, indeed, the researchers, the research projects, etc. So it's really about coming with a focus that is much broader than the one we have today. So let me now go more in details into specifically research assessment. Even though I insist at EUA, we'd like to keep in mind academic career assessment more broadly. But let's focus. What do we mean by research assessment? Well, as I was saying, and I think most of you will agree, I hope, today we're assessing based on a very limited number of proxy indicators, mostly linked with journals, articles. And that has led to some clear negative consequences. Again, no time to talk about that. I'll try to keep time at the end because I'd like to hear you back on all of this. But the idea is to go back to those core academic values that I've just described, openness, research integrity, etc., and think about, okay, so how do we come up with a system, an assessment system for research that is responsible, transparent, sustainable? So that's what we're talking about when we talk about reforming research assessment. And let's face it, we're not alone in this. So now DORA, it's just over 10 years, so that's the San Francisco Declaration on Research Assessment. But since DORA, lots has happened. You only see a few listed here, but the UNESCO recommendation on open science is one of them. It was an important one, I think. But you can see the Leiden Manifesto, etc. So I think many of you know about this. So there's quite a momentum out there internationally about a reform of research assessment being needed. Huh? And it's also happening on the ground. I'm sure we have Dutch colleagues here and we have Norwegian colleagues. I'm giving the example because, of course, I'm from Europe. But the room for everyone's talent taking place in the Netherlands is clearly a concrete example of how this is moving forward in one country. Not easy, but it's taking place. Same thing with NORCAM, that was established by the Norwegian universities and their National Rector Conference, but also with other stakeholders, such as the funders. We at the EUA have worked with DORA and Spark Europe to identify case studies helping universities reimagine academic career assessment. So it's concrete examples that they can then use to try to implement within their own settings. So those are things that are happening already. And this is the stakeholder community, our community, university community. What's really interesting, and here I'm talking specifically about Europe, is that while we have this bottom-up approach with all the stakeholders, the community engaged, we have very strong political support, both from the European Commission, but also from governments, from the member states. As early as 2020 and 2021, in different council conclusions, for those who don't know what a council conclusion is, member states could, the member states of the Union, the 27 these days, get together and actually agree on what it is that they want to achieve together. And those are council conclusions. And you can see that back in 2020 and 2021, they were talking about reigniting the European research area, this one single market for knowledge, for research, for researcher. And there already, they were talking about a revision of the system for research assessment. Then we had very strong support under the French presidency in June 2022, where there was a dedicated council conclusion coming specifically on research assessment. So very strong support. Further back up, more recently this year in June, under the Swedish presidency, where this time the council conclusions were on publishing, the scholarly publishing. But there again, they welcomed very much the activities of CoARA, the coalition I'm going to tell you about, and the need to have interaction between the member states, the Commission, the associated countries, and the stakeholders. So very strong support. And just to highlight one last element is there at the bottom in the middle, you've got the ERA Forum. That's the European Research Area Forum. That's where we stakeholders, I sit on the forum with member states and European Commission, and we talk about 20 actions to help create this single European research area. And one of the actions is dedicated to the form of research assessment, and that's action number 3. So we're working with them on this specifically. So yes, we do have a bottom-up approach combined in Europe with a top-down approach, the support from national authorities. Quite unique as a situation. So back in December 2021, I got a call. in the evening, but it was from someone from the commission. So usually don't refuse those kind of calls. You say, okay, I'm going to take it. And then Kostas Glinas at the time was saying, look, Stephane, would you at EUA be interested to join with Science Europe? Science Europe is the club, the association of all the funders in Europe, plus some research performing organizations. And so he was asking, would you like with Science Europe to draft an agreement on how to reform research assessment? Well, you don't say no to that kind of offer. So EUA engaged into this. We were doing it with Science Europe, as well as with the Commission as a facilitator. We didn't do it alone. What you can see here is the whole process. To draft this agreement, we were able to rely on a core group of 20 organizations, including other university associations, but also academies, for example, associations of funders, etc., who were our sounding board. And in addition to that, we were able to work with a stakeholder assembly. We held over 1 year, in 2022, 4 assemblies. Just to give you an idea, after the second assembly, when we presented the draft, we got more than 500 comments back that we had to deal with. So that was really the bottom-up process. At the same time, as you can see here on the left, member states were active within the ERA forum, within the ERA committee, and they were providing them their input also. And with that, in July, we published the agreement. From then on, in 2022, until December, we worked on the creation of the coalition CoARA. So that's the Coalition for Advancing Research Assessment. And the vision there is really that we want to reform how we assess research, researcher, but also research organizations. Sorry. And the idea is to be able to take into account now the whole diversity of outcomes, of practices that academics do when they do research, and that lead them to have impact, of course. And so, in this case, what we insist on also is the importance, again, of the qualitative approach versus not disappearing, but still more important, than the quantitative approach, with a central role for peer review. So that's really what it is about. So let me first go a little bit into the agreement itself. I would urge you, please, it's only a 9-page document. If you haven't read it, do consider reading it, because, as always, devil is in the details. And here I'm only giving you a very quick overview. There are principles that are described in there, and it's followed by 10 commitments. Within those 10 commitments, you've got 4 core commitments. The 2 that I call positive, which are, and you won't be surprised, recognizing the diversity of contribution to and careers in research in accordance with the needs and nature of research. This is about the broadness of what needs to be recognized when you assess a researcher, a research project, a research institution. So that's the first one. The second one is, well, as I said before, base your research assessments primarily on a qualitative evaluation where peer review is central, but with the support of a responsible use, and responsible use here is very important, of quantitative indicators. So that's the second. Now let's go to what some consider the negative core commitments. Abandon, and here I insist, abandon inappropriate use. And I would urge you to go back to the document to see what is defined as inappropriate use. But not abandon completely, let's be clear. Abandon the inappropriate use in research assessment of journal and publication-based metrics, in particular, the journal impact factor or the H index. And then the fourth commitment is about avoiding the use of rankings, not overall. We're not saying stop using rankings. What we're saying is stop using rankings to actually assess research organizations, assess research projects, assess researchers, period. Okay? So that's the fourth commitment. Those are the 4 core commitments. Then you've got 6 supporting commitments, because let's face it, number 5, if you engage and you sign into this and join the coalition, well, you're going to have to allocate some resources. You're going to have to put some staff into this. You're going to have to put some budget into this. It's going to be up to you as an institution, how much you do that, but that's number 5. Number 6, if you sign and you enter the coalition, you agree into entering a review process. Okay? What we don't want is this to be a declaration. Nothing against DORA, but unfortunately we see many universities, not all, but many universities signing DORA and then nothing else happens. This is supposed to be active. When you enter, there's a process that starts, and the process actually is about entering a review process in which you review what you do, and then you come up with new tools, new criteria, new processes. And this at the level of units and institution, but also at the level of projects and researcher. So that's number 6. Then number 7, raise awareness. Obviously, you want to make sure that after your rector, your vice chancellor, your president signs this agreement, this is conveyed to the wider community in your university. But then also beyond that, you need to be ready to communicate, to provide guidelines, training. So that's what number 7 is about. Number 8 is more about getting together with others in the world to share what it is you're doing and to learn what it is they are doing. Let's face it, the Netherlands right now, with their room for everyone's talent, they have a lot to teach us. Some of the other countries where we're not as far. Good and bad. So there, it's the whole idea of the coalition where we get together and we share all this information. Number 9 is about the fact that as you enter this process of reforming within your institution, you need to communicate about it. You need to let others know also what it is you're doing. And finally, number 10, I think you would agree that we still today don't have enough research on research. We need to have more data for more evidence to know where it is that we want to go if we want to reform research assessment. So that's number 10. I told you that this was not supposed to be just a declaration, and this is a cycle we're talking about. So for those who signed last year, but there are still people signing today. I just learned yesterday that Université de Namur in my country has recently signed. After 1 year, you're supposed to develop your own work plan. So each institution, fully autonomously, are to start the process and define what it is that they're going to be doing over the next 5 years, looking into at least one cycle of review and development of those criteria, tools, and processes. So that's what we're talking about, okay? A 5-year process. Trust me, I've got white hair. I won't see the end of this because I think it's going to be several cycles we go through. But it's important that it's actually active. So now the coalition. The coalition today is made up of more than 580 organizations. And you can see that the vast majority of them, not surprisingly, 63%, are universities. That is followed behind that by the research centers, infrastructures, and their association. At 8%, you've got the funders, as well as the academies and the learned societies. At 6%, you don't see that because the slides didn't transfer well. At 6%, you've got other relevant non-profit organizations that are involved in research assessment. And at 2%, you've got national and regional authorities. For example, in Italy, ANVOR is part of the coalition. So that's what we're talking about. Yes, today, the initiative is still mostly, in this case, European. You can see that all the way to the left there, the biggest countries in terms of signatories are Spain, France, Poland, for example. And it's only fair because there's quite a large number of universities in those countries, but they're really engaged into the whole process. We have a few universities and other organizations elsewhere in the world, but it's still mostly European. And the idea, and one of the reasons I want to come here, is yes, most of you are European, but there are also some who are not. And so we try to talk about the initiative as much as possible to make it global. I will be, for example, talking about this with other research funders also when I'm invited to the Global Research Council later in November in Bucharest. There are also, and let's face it, some countries that we're missing or that we're not enough universities. The UK is a good example. I hear that in the UK, they're so much into the ref that, of course, that is their focus, and this shouldn't be their focus. Other countries are really doubtful. Germany. In Germany, few universities so far have joined. They're really well aware, but they're waiting to see what's happening. So that's what the situation is when it comes to the membership. Quite large still. I'd like to know, so there is a poll, so can you go to your app? Because I'd like to know, actually, among you here, how many have their institution that have signed the agreement and or joined actually CoARA. And if you don't know, it's fine. It's one of the answers. But it's yes, no, not yet. Could you put the slide up? It's coming. There you go. Oh, quite a few yes. Quite a few that don't know also. Good. Well, this is more than I was expecting, so that's really good. So we're around a quarter of you have signed the agreement. Great. Quite a few that don't know. Some know, and some are considering, which means that actually all the ones there on top, you're aware of what's happening already. So that's good news. I'm more worried about the 40% at the bottom who don't know at all. So either you've never heard about this, and now you have, and I would urge you to go back to your leadership and find out about it when you go back, and maybe convince them to sign, because the work is starting actually. So as I was mentioning, right now we're developing those who have signed an action plan and the time frame that I told you about, but then there's also working groups that are starting. I don't have the time to go in full details about the working groups, but there are 10 working groups that have already been established. And EUA is leading one, and not surprisingly, ours is on reforming academic career assessment. So we're going beyond research assessment. The idea is to develop a toolbox for universities to look into this. Another one we're involved in is the one led by Eurodoc, where in this case, it's about early and mid-career researchers. Because we do believe that they will be the ones that are most at risk with this reform, because it's not about those who are well established in the field, but those who are emerging that will need to play by new rules. And of course, they are the most in danger. But you can see otherwise that there are many other topics, such as interdisciplinarity, experiments in proposal, etc., that are starting. So those are the first working groups. There's a new round that actually is starting, so there will be new working groups. And this is where the work is going to take place and where guidelines, for example, will emerge. Now, I'd like to finish with what it means for you. Well, I mentioned it. There's a time frame. So yes, if you sign and you join CoARA, you need concretely to come up with your own work plan and start doing the whole review process and reforming in your institution. Please keep in mind that when you do that, you will be fully autonomous as an institution to do that. There will be no CoARA coming and checking on you. There won't be any benchmarking between universities. We want to be very clear about that. It's all about your autonomy, and that is very important. Also, all the assessment will be through self-assessment, and it won't be CoARA coming and assessing you. So that's the first thing. Then, of course, as I mentioned, if you go into this, you are going to need to put in some resources in terms of staff, in terms of budget, to be able to achieve it. So yes, it has consequences. But again, here it's going to be based on your work plan that you establish yourself in each institution, and there is going to be no minimum to put in as resources. Okay? Let's be very clear about that. A question I get often is this agreement legally binding? Well, let's face it, no, it is not. It's not legally binding, okay? So you might think, is it worth anything? Well, yes, I think there are commitments in there. There are principles, and when you sign, you're expected to abide by those. And this means also that when you do that, while you still retain full control yourself of what it is you're going to do within the context of reform and in the context of CoARA, you will be looked at by your own community. Your researchers in your universities can come and ask, okay, so what are we doing for the reform? Beyond that, it's also going to be morally binding because others within CoARA will know you have signed and will be expecting you to explain what it is that you're doing. So no, it's not legally binding, but it's certainly, I think, is morally binding. So that's quite important here. Let me finish with something more specific towards you. I was asked to think about the consequence for you, users of pure and CRIS systems, because I think you have a major role to play. We're all research managers and administrators, and as much as we're not researchers ourselves, we can influence quite drastically the whole process, be it also the process of reform on research assessment. So instead of answering myself, I've gone back to one of the documents I showed you earlier, the one from Norway, the NORCAM as they call it. NOR for Norway, and CAM for Career Assessment Matrix. Well, what they've done in that document is really good. They've come up with a toolbox to help universities identify those areas of competences, the results and competencies as examples that they need to consider, and then the documentation. So let me give you an example. When it comes to research output, yes, we're talking about publications, about data sets, for example, softwares in this case, methodologies, artistic outputs, and research reports. But it can go beyond. Again, this is flexible. These are just examples. And you can see, I've highlighted here in red, CRIS system is clearly identified already by the Norwegians as one of the key elements that's going to help them document this. So yes, you can certainly play a role, and not just for research output. It's the same for research processes. Here we're talking about leadership, we're talking about collaboration, interdisciplinarity, etc. Important elements that are core values for us as academics within universities. And here again, it's not me saying it. You can see that Norwegians are considering that the CRIS systems have a role to play. So you have a role to play. They don't see it for the pedagogical competences. I think it's sad, because it means today that's not yet a focus. And that's one of our aims of reforming not just research assessment, but careers, academic careers, is that this should be considered. And if you start having source data for this, why not include it also in your CRIS system? Impact innovation, I've made my point at the very start, I think. Yes, it needs to be in there. Of course, innovation, entrepreneurial skills, etc. Social innovation, very important also. Innovation in the public sector is not documented well because it's not patents, etc. Those need to start being documented so that we can have trace of this. Same thing about citizen science. All those elements are in there. And here again, the Norwegians do see a role for CRIS systems. So you have a role to play. Same thing for leadership. Again, they do foresee this. And while, of course, other experience that they foresee are not yet in there in the CRIS system, I think it's more because it's what's coming, what the future is looking like. So that's what I would leave you with and challenge you with. Is I think the one thing I haven't touched upon is that column that they have around reflection. And don't worry, I'm not going to go into details for all of those. But what comes out of this is, yes, you can have an impact because of the work you do on the reform of research assessment, but to do that, you need to reflect. Universities need to self-reflect and really think about the relevance of the data they collect and what sort of impact it will have on such a process as the reform of research assessment. What is it that we want as academics and as an academic community to assess research, researchers, research institution, research projects on? It's ourselves that need to think about that and reflect very carefully on the relevance. And if I extract just a few keywords here from the NORCAM, it is about quality, no question about that. It's of course about openness, open access, fair, open science. That brings me back to the very start of my presentation. But it's also about the actors. Who is it? Who are they the ones that are being assessed? And why is it that we want to assess them and how? It needs to be transparent. We're talking about competences, experience here. We're talking about roles. You need to define that very carefully to have a system that is actually relevant when you assess. It's about education, which we don't have enough. It's also about reaching out to society, to the public. How do we assess that? Do we actually today? I don't think so, not enough. So that's what I would like to leave you with, is this profound need and opportunity that you have to play a big role in this reform by both working through your CRIS system on finding the right elements to include, data, but reflect on, is it really those that we want to have in there? Okay? So with that, all I've told you about is on our website. You can find more information in the various channels. And I'll be very happy to take any questions or comments that I would very much welcome. Thank you very much.
sorry, a question. Can I ask you one?
Of course.
When the results were in around the awareness, around the agreement, and it was 41%, you said that was concerning to you. What do you think could be done to increase that awareness?
So, I mean, right now, basically what we're trying to do is just like today. So let me step back. I am not part of the CoARA governance itself. I am just one of the members, and of course, I do find as one of the drafters and the creators of CoARA that we as EUA have a role. So anytime there's an opportunity to go and talk about the CoARA and the reform, I use that opportunity. So that is part of what we do. We've included this in our own work plan, and I think it is a role for anyone in this room who have signed to also be the advocates. Because I think that what was very clear to us when we spoke to the Dutch, for example, is that they realized that to be able to implement their reform in the Netherlands, they can only do it if this goes global. First for them, European, that's why they were very supportive of CoARA, but also global. So I think there's a role for every one of us to play. And then more specifically, within the governance of CoARA, they have themselves there's 12 steering board members, and they're going as much as they can around the world to actually advocate and inform people about it.
Okay, great. Any questions for Stephane?
Really? I was that clear.
Is that clear? And you'll be around, right, if anyone wanted to ask questions? Oh, we do have questions. Good.
Hello. Thank you for your presentation. I'm from Mexico, and also we believe that in our University of Monterrey, we want to change the metrics or only be measuring the articles and publications and lower that measure so the researchers don't feel the pressure to publish, but they have a plan for transfer the research. So with this, are you mentioning that avoid the rankings? It's interesting approach. What do you believe that the universities will embrace this approach because they are following the rankings and there's a competition for the rankings? For our university, the ranking is not our priority because we are not in the top 10 or top 100. So for us, it's more important to have an impact in the local community, and by being following the rankings is not our goal. So do you believe that the universities will? What have you heard about avoiding the rankings?
Well, Utrecht University has just decided to pull out of any ranking, international ranking in the world. Trust me, that's very courageous. And it is one example, but I suspect there will be others. Do I say you need to ban rankings? No, we're not saying that. What we're saying is that you shouldn't use rankings as it is used in some countries to assess research. That in itself is just crazy. If you want to start talking about rankings and their consequences, that's a whole other discussion. I think universities have this love and hate relationship with the rankings that they have to come to terms with. And this is where the self-reflection is the fundamental part, I think. And I believe an institution like Utrecht has done that with the consequence that will come. And then going back to what you were saying earlier, how the publication metrics you're trying to move away, don't try to move away. Make sure that instead of moving away from, you ensure that you start looking at other types of metrics. And by doing that, what you're going to have in the end is much less importance given to some specific indicators, such as, for example, publications. And our colleagues from Elsevier might not like that so much, but at the same time, they play a very important role also in other elements in there. And so you, users of CRIS system, they, the service providers, you all have a role to play to help actually the academic community own back and define what it is that we want to have in the way we assess research and careers. So yeah, you don't need to displace in a sense, the proxies that are looking at publication. Just bring on other ones, and that will do the job, I think. I'm very optimistic. Thibault.
Is it okay?
Yes.
Okay. Thibault Leray, Chaos University, Saudi Arabia. Thank you very much for your presentation. I would like to hear your view about the impact and revolution of artificial intelligence in the future of research assessment. Because the way we are going to publish, the way we are going to do research, and even how to assess universities, I'm sure will change. So what would be your view?
Absolutely. I think that, as always with new technologies, we might be fearful and think this is the crazy thing. We'll be dealing with it, and it's going to be, in the end, helping us as much as causing some risks. So, yes. But I think that in this case, it is going to be huge opportunities, because what I do see is the opportunity, and I'm no AI expert, let's face it, but I do see it as an opportunity because it's going to allow smaller players to access things that were never accessible before. And that includes, let's face it, universities. I think that universities today are, in a sense, fearful of the consequence, but I see already how agile they are at incorporating AI for the teaching, for example. And the first resistance we saw, and I use education as an example because that was obvious, is completely being transformed. I'm sure that the same will happen in the process. Where? I don't know. Because here, for the reform of research assessment, I'm not enough of an AI expert to know where it is. But I think that you guys should be definitely talking about AI and where it can help, be it in generative AI or beyond that. But again, I'm no expert.
We have a question over here.
Hi, I'm Armand Nicheri from TU Delft University. I'm very happy you brought up Utrecht University as being very courageous for putting out of the rankings. I think courage is probably what we need in our own institutions, all of us, because you have to change the policies, you have to change current practices of using the CRIS systems. Because I see that the current use of CRIS systems can also perpetuate the wrong practices. And because it's just easier to leave things as they are, there's a big investment necessary, I think, to change current practices. So I think maybe a problem here is also that Elsevier tries to make all the customers happy. So we still have an H index in pure. I think we need to have this on the agenda in our pure user group meetings on a national level. That what do we want to see in our CRIS systems? What do we want to see changed to support your agenda?
Absolutely. And you just made me realize I made a mistake. I don't think it's Utrecht, it's Delft, actually. Sorry about that. Sorry? It is Utrecht? Good. Thanks for confirming that. Yes, you're right. And I think that, well, two ways to look at this. Elsevier, I think, is doing a good job at providing you, with a good service. But they should not be the one defining what's in there. If you're not happy about the H index being in there, do tell them. And you are the ones who should be owning, at least for your university and hopefully more broadly for the community, what it is that should be in pure in terms of the data and the indicators they provide, even the way it's reported. And then I turn then to Elsevier and I say, it is your opportunity also to make a change. They haven't used us doing that, but I think at the same time, it is an opportunity for them commercially, because let's face it, it's a commercial operation, and they do a really good job at that. But I think the two can actually meet. But for that, you have to be very clear about what it is that you want. And I think there, again, self-reflection. We as an academic community, we as a research manager community, have maybe not been strategically enough and self-reflective enough about what it is that we want. I was hearing last night someone telling me that most of us are just, in there, we're looking at the number, crunching the numbers. Well, stop. Stop, breathe, and think. And think about what is it that we want to see as numbers? And what is it that they should mean? Let's not just take any number, because it's out there. You're right.
Stephane, Stephane, thank you. I'd like to take your assist on the providers representing Elsevier. And my question, I would like to go back to the survey results, because it was quite surprising to me that after 10 years of the DORA declaration and this push on moving away from publications as the only proxy to measure research, still, the number one was publications and the number two was money. So my question is whether those priorities are driven more by the availability of data than an actual prioritization of what really matters. So in other words, if more data was available about all the other facets of research, impact, commercialization, societal impact, etc., do you think those priorities would change? And of course, being one of the data and software providers, we have a stake in that. Thank you.
No, absolutely, Alberto. I think that, I mean, one of the articles, actually, I didn't show the image today, is just this, you know, it's a bit like, you know, why are you looking for a key here when you know you lost it over there in the middle of the night? Well, because this is where the light is. And this is exactly the problem we have. The data has been driving, actually, those metrics that we are using. And I think that's one of the fundamental problems that we have. So yes, we're in full agreement. But that's not why we shouldn't be starting to think about, indeed, first, what are the other indicators we want to look at? And what sort of missing information do we have? I think there are some quick wins. Some are going to take much longer. I've never said that this is easy. It's going to take quite a while. But if we don't start today, we'll never get there. And so I think it's really fundamental, again, to ask ourselves, well, what sort of indicators do we want? And let's not forget, I'm talking indicators because you are all focused on indicators. The main message from the agreement is that in the end, it should be also a qualitative approach and not just a number crunching exercise to do research assessment. That's just something I'm saying in parentheses. But yes, indeed, and that's commitment number 10 of the agreement. We need more research on research. We need to be able to collect the evidence and find out which other indicators, for example, we should be using. And some are going to be difficult. Huh? Some are going to be difficult, but some other are, I think, easy, and we can start using those already.
Hi, I'm Anna. I'm from Aalborg University. It's not as much as a question as an invitation, because tomorrow we have a presentation about a practical example of how to translate this CoARA and the CoARA commitments into a research indicator that can be used, it can be measured, and there are also qualitative measures. So we would very much like your input too, if you have the time tomorrow, to have a look at our take on this error-compatible research indicator.
Thank you for the invitation. Unfortunately, tomorrow is the EUA board meeting in Brussels, and on Friday, EUA council meeting, and I have to go back at the end of the day. So I'll be around today, so happy to talk about that today. I wanted to stay, but you know, there's an RNI agenda that's being discussed, and I'm responsible for that, so trust me, I better be there tomorrow. But yes, happy to talk about that during the coffee break also. Huh?
Sure. Thanks.
Thank you. And follow that. I think that's a good example. Go and check it out, because that's concretely how some universities are thinking about doing it themselves and integrating it in their processes.
Thanks. More of a comment than a question here. I just asked my team in the product, can H-index be deactivated from display in the personal user screens or the personal editor screens? Does anybody from product or client service know? And the answer from Jeremy was yes in both cases. So feel free to deactivate that metric, and yeah, just want to make that point.
Don't just deactivate it. Scratch it. I mean, take it off, period. Thank you.
Thanks, Stephane. Thanks.